Welcome to another edition of Newsline 360. I'm your host, Andre Huey. On this edition of Newsline 360, we discuss the matter of climate change. We take a review of COP30 with an interview with the Minister of Sustainable Development, as was done by the Carib Update News Service. Plus, later on in the show, we speak to Caribbean climate change expert Steven Maximay on the importance of COP and some other important matters as it relates to climate change. You're watching Newsline 360. We first begin with the interview on the Carib Update News Service with the Minister of Sustainable Development et al., Dr. Joyelle Clarke.
So I am joined now by the Honorable Senator Dr. Joyelle Clarke, who is the Minister of Sustainable Development, Environment and Climate Action and Constituency Empowerment in St. Kitts and Nevis. Senator Clarke, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, coming out of COP30, what is the one groundbreaking thing that would have come from these latest round of talks and negotiations?
Well, I think for small and developing states like St. Kitts and Nevis and for CARICOM states in particular, it would be the first historic call of the fund for responding to loss and damage. On November 10th, they made that call clear and what groundbreaking and historic as it relates to the executive director his commitment to CARICOM nations and to all nations was that there is at least $800 million in the fund. States have guaranteed access, and of course, it's grant-based access and not concessional financing. And that for us is historic because we've maintained that climate finance has to be grant-based primarily. And that is good for us in terms of accessibility to the loss and damage fund. And just recently, CARICOM sat with the ED and he made a commitment that as of December 15th, applications will be accepted to the FRLD. And by the end of 2026, we should hope to have countries being able to access that resource. And so we know for Jamaica in particular, that's still dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa, that their access to that fund would be critical for CARICOM countries.
You mentioned FRID. Exactly what is that and what does it entail?
FRLD, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. And as you know, that this was a critical negotiating position for CARICOM countries led by EOSAS. In COP29, we had the operationalization of the fund at and now that we have access to the resources, it's really good for us.
So for your people watching in St. Kitts and Nevis, what would you say are the benefits of your delegation participating in this latest COP edition?
Well, we maintain that you have to show up in these places in order to negotiate for the positions that you want for your country. And when we're here, we're not just showing up as St. Kitts and Nevis, or we're showing up as CARICOM, we're showing up as EOSAS. We have a clear position heading into the COP, and that's always to maintain the special circumstances of states like St. Kitts and Nevis. We have our negotiators who are participating in specific tracks on just transition, on adaptation finance, and the opportunities to share knowledge, to learn. In fact, just on the other side of the CARICOM Pavilion where we're hosting this interview, the Virgin Islands Climate Change Trust Fund, they presented that trust fund facility to the rest of CARICOM states. And it's a very innovative way of providing climate finance to blended options, that's government funding, environmental levies, and of course, climate finance from international and multilateral organizations. And this is an opportunity for St. Kitts and Nevis that has its own sustainable island state agenda to pattern what Virgin Islands is doing in terms of setting up that climate trust fund. And I'm telling you that that's something that we definitely will be looking into in 2026. So being here at COP, you are learning, you're negotiating, and you're also establishing the positions that CARICOM needs to protect small island developing states.
Now, in the days before COP30, Azerbaijan, which hosted COP29, and Brazil put forward a roadmap for mobilizing $1.3 trillion a year in climate financing for developing countries by 2035. Now, was there any progress on that?
So the conversations on climate finance, they are ongoing. So I wouldn't want to make a specific commentary on the progress on it, but what I would say is that developed countries are making their commitments very clear in terms of providing more funding support for adaptation finance. This COP has promised to be the implementation COP where adaptation is of equally important to mitigation. And what we're realizing is that for us to really find more resources for communities, especially at this time when a lot of developing states are prioritizing national security. The challenge that we're having is that more funds are moving towards border security and national security and less so towards climate finance. But the CARICOM states maintain that states have to have access to accessible grant-based financing and that the NCGQ, that the new collective fund by goal from last year, from last COP, is maintained that we have to find ways of committing more resources to climate finance, specifically for adaptation.
All right, now talk to us about the Tropical Forest Forever facility, which seems to be a timely and transformative mechanism that pays countries to keep forests standing through blended finance. Was there any significant progress on that front?
Oh, definitely not. During the Leaders Summit, which was held just before the official start of COP, the Prime Minister of Guyana made it very clear that nations should support the Tropical Forest Forever facility. And we've had countries like Germany making commitments to this facility, and this session was hosted by President Lula and the top presidency. And what we are seeing here is that there is an urgency to protect tropical forests. I know that many of us, when we look at the news as it relates to COP, we're seeing the protests by the indigenous folks in terms of protecting their rights to access to the forest and the resources of the forest. But what we are also noting, have to establish that carbon neutral countries like Suriname, for example, their carbon neutrality is based on the fact that they have this advantage of the tropical forest. And the forests are good for maintaining terrestrial biodiversity, for dealing with carbon in the atmosphere. So scientists at Nevis, and I'm sure other CARICOM countries would look forward to supporting the Tropical Forest Forever facility. Everyone can't give the same amount, but if it's your commitment, let's say, through a 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of our terrestrial landscape by 2030. These are biodiversity targets, and we're recognizing more and more that biodiversity and climate has to go hand in hand because that's how we protect planets and people.
Now, there is a growing number of skeptics around the world that who think that the entire COP process has not reaped enough benefits to the global climate change agenda, given the repeat failure of nations to meet the very commitments coming out of these meetings. What do you say to these growing skeptics out there?
I don't know if there is a growing number of skeptics or if there's one particular skeptic that's trying to adjust narrative. So what I'd say is the world has recognized more and more that there's an urgency to protect small and developing states, coastal nations, small communities, rural communities, indigenous communities from climate change, from the risk of climate change. And what I'm happy about is that more and more there are multilateral organizations, development banks that are providing these innovative opportunities for countries to respond to climate crisis. Now, so you see what happened in Jamaica with Hurricane Melissa. How can you be a climate skeptic? And what we're doing in St. Kitts and Nevis, and one of our good outcomes for our participation here at this COP, is that our partnership with the Global Center for Climate Mobility, economic operation, has provided us with direct access to the climate finance, so it's communities climate adaptation facility, which brings money directly to our community work. And we have 3 particular community groups that are going to benefit from this direct financing. No strings attached, no government intervention other than in-kind support, which allows communities which are on the front lines of the climate crisis to provide responses based on their knowledge, based on their experiences. So regardless of one loud skeptic or a growing number of skeptics, the climate community remains resolute in finding these solutions, in really contributing to changing the landscape and the narrative around climate change.
All right, Senator Clarke, thank you very much for taking the time off to share with us some of the developments coming out of COP30 today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Your favorite TV shows are just a click away with TVC Plus at tvcplus.live. Stream our 24-hour live programming. Catch the latest episodes of TVC Originals on demand. Enjoy premium pay-per-view content and so much more. Watch on any device, TV, laptop, tablet, or smartphone. Visit www.tvcplus.live. Stream, watch, enjoy.
Tune in to Insights on TVC, where we explore the unique stories and perspectives of our fascinating guests.
I used to get in trouble for talking.
I am really angry. I forget English.
I had good examples of what people could become.
Each episode brings you an in-depth look at individuals from diverse backgrounds, sharing their personal journeys and valuable life insights.
I don't know. We're going to bathe here because Papa Bratcher says nobody owns the beach in St. Kitts.
People who sound like this and saying that they're like 15, I'm like, you have a beard.
Insights airs on Mondays at 8 p.m. with rebroadcast on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Only on Television Caribbean, TVC. You can also stream on demand at tvcplus.live.
At The Cable, we believe in giving back because when our community thrives, we all do. That's why, as a company, we make it our mission to touch the lives of everyone in St. Kitts. We spearheaded the renovation of JNF Hospital lobby to ensure better care for all. The Cable sponsors free Wi-Fi in every community center across St. Kitts, so no one is left behind in an increasingly connected world. We stand with communities through every moment, big or small, in culture, education, youth development, and more. Y a ti también, comunidad latina. Cuenta con nosotros. Estamos con ustedes. And when it comes to customer service, we set the standard. We're just a call, click, or visit away because you matter to us. Join the company that truly cares. The Cable, more than service. We're family. Somos familia. And we're proud to always give more where it matters.
It's entertainment TV at its finest. Join us for Main Event, the Caribbean's leading entertainment show only on Television Caribbean TVC. Tune in as our host chats with top artists and entertainers, bring you the latest buzz in entertainment, and showcase the hottest music videos from the region's biggest stars. Main Event airs on Thursdays at 8 p.m. with rebroadcast on Fridays at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. When it comes to entertainment, it's always the Main Event on TVC.
Hi, I'm Andre Huey, and welcome back to Newsline 360 here on TVC Channel 40. And as promised you, we are now joined by Mr. Steve Maximay. He is Climate Smart Agriculture and Marketing Expert at PISLM, which is the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management. It's an intergovernmental organization where all 15 CARICOM countries have signed on to, and it's currently headquartered in Grenada. Steve, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
As usual, a pleasure to be with you.
Yes. Now, you were at COP30 in Brazil recently, at least for part of it. Just give us your initial thoughts. I know you would have been focused primarily on the agriculture sector and that as it pertains to the region. So if you could just give us your initial thoughts on the time you spent there and what you thought of the gathering this year.
Okay, but I think it's important to put it into context. This is not my first rodeo. It's not my first COP, and I think we need to put it into the context of the UNFCCC and this conference of the parties and the original intentions and how far we have come. And then I'll tell you what my impression of COP30 was all about. In terms of agriculture has only been on the COP agenda since around 20 2011. I was lucky enough to be at that COP 17 in Durban, where agriculture was being focused upon as a really important sector. Previously, agriculture was considered under something called AFOLU, so agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. So coming out of Durban and heading up to the 2015 Paris Agreement, agriculture has become more prominently featured. So fast forward now to Belém. Again, agriculture is still not necessarily mainstream, but we are getting there. And given the considerable finances going into the sector, it was important for people like me to be there as technocrats, trying to get the negotiators in line with what we see as some of the nuanced climate finance instruments and perspectives that they need to take to be able for Caribbean agriculture to survive. I mean, it's as melodramatic as that. For Caribbean agriculture to survive, we must make some adjustments, and there must be the finance to facilitate that adjustment. And that's where I come in. So from that point of view, it was particularly useful. I'm not one of those COP deniers. I know that the process is, I mean, it's grindingly slow. But like most things that you need to, to get right, it takes a long time, but success is incremental. It's never, extravagant. I think we are going to have an outcome in Belém that will be consistent with the previous solutions, but not what anybody would really expect. In Baku last year, there was an expectation, well, not an expectation, a desire for 1.3 trillion. We got 300 billion. But when you throw these massive amounts of money around, it doesn't tell the true picture. The true picture for SIDS like us in the Caribbean is that how much of that 300 billion that is pledged is actually activated, and how much of that can we secure for our own development here in SIDS.
And I'm glad you brought up that issue as well, because I know a lot of the persons who have had issues or concerns about about COP is that most of them, they see it as a talk shop. They see it as, well, we're going to have this discussion, but when the rubber meets the road, the crucial decisions that need to be taken are usually not activated upon. You, however, have a slightly different view. You are, of course, not happy with how long it's taken, but you're a bit more optimistic. And why that optimism, though?
I am one of those people who seriously subscribe to the view that were it not for these COP meetings, we would probably be looking at a 5-degree centigrade rise in temperatures. I firmly believe that. This is not just a UNFCCC, talking point. I have seen the type of reductions that have been possible given the limited emissions controls that we have managed to do so far. And I'm sure that in the absence of even those minuscule changes, we will be facing a much hotter, a much more dangerous world. So I'm one of those believers in the talk shop, because I understand that the talk shop is a preliminary phase for the actual implementation. And this time around, President Lula has described this COP as an implementation COP. I mean, we are yet to see, if that will turn out to be so. But from where I sit, it is an implementation COP out of necessity. In other words, I tend to be melodramatic, especially when I'm speaking to journalists. In the absence of very real things, people will die. And we just have to look at Jamaica. More recently, people have died, and people will die if we don't get this thing right.
But from the agriculture standpoint, how devastating is climate change, especially to Caribbean agriculture?
Well, we can take our pick. Either we can deal with the drought end, we can deal with the flooding end, we can deal with the increased pests, because as a consequence of climate change, you have differing circulatory patterns, so that we are now being literally bombarded by new diseases and pests. There's an observatory in Barbados that monitors Sahara dust And the strange things we've been finding in that Sahara dust, is only a symptomatic of what's going on generally. So if you think about the impact of drought, and we've had some severe droughts throughout the Caribbean, and it's increasingly incredible that you can have drought in the middle of what is supposed to be the rainy season. And then the converse is sometimes true, where you have flood events that are not associated with a hurricane or any recognized system. It's just a stationary cloud that stays overhead and dumps, literally, thousands of gallons of rain. And there's no drainage system on any farm anywhere that can handle something like that. So when you have those kinds of extreme events, then you're obviously going to lose an entire crop. And not just concentrated on the crop end of it, at the livestock end, the increased heat and so has affected the stress cycles for a number of your mammals, your ruminants, small ruminants, large ruminants, and of course, the heat impacts your poultry production, etc. So across the board, this climate crisis has negatively impacted Caribbean agriculture, as indeed it has done so to agriculture across the globe. What is of more immediate concern for people like me is that we now have mechanisms in place that can help us at least get through some of these hurdles. And one of those is climate smart agriculture, and that is the area that I'm particularly focused on. So that I've developed a tool, a methodology called Climate Smart Agriculture Compliance, and that has given us, within the Caribbean, a way to measure how climate smart our operations are, and that is also linked to a new climate finance instrument that we have developed. So in that narrow focus, I am positive because I know what improvements are on the way, because I've been lucky enough to be part of those improvements, so that I've seen what is possible out of Dominica, out of Antigua, out of Grenada, etc. So that is my reason for the optimism.
Right. Well, maybe you could
As I
share.
say, without getting into the technical details, that would be a sort of shot across the bow as to where agriculture falls into the whole thing.
Right. Well, we won't get too technical because we want to keep our viewers, in tune and engaged.
Yeah.
But if you could at least, though, share a little bit about what it is that you do and the work that the organization that you represent, PISLM, does across the Caribbean.
Well, we are probably the only institution in the region that integrates what is known as the Big Three Rio Conventions. As I said, without getting too technical, there are some major UN conventions that we all subscribe to. So there's the UNCCD, which is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. There's the more popular UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And then there's a somewhat lesser known United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. What our organization has been able to do is to pull resources from all three of those, although we were set up under UNCCD, to come up with these climate smart agriculture projects and model farms, and to be able to support this CSAC thing that I was telling you about without getting into the technical details. So it is really a flagship organization, and I'm proud to be part of it.
Indeed. Before we move into some issues that you raised, or actually in the message you sent me earlier before this interview, there is one issue that is for me as a journalist is really a pet peeve, and it's misinformation and conspiracy theories that disinformation and conspiracy theories that we hear from time to time. Whenever there's a natural disaster, we hear all these things. I won't even repeat them. I'm sure many of our viewers would have seen and heard. But one of the underlying themes of most of this information is that somehow the disasters that we're faced that are attributed to climate change are somehow man-made and are created to create destruction of particular places at particular times. I'm going to hear this every time there's a major hurricane. As someone who's a scientist, yes,
there are some bits of conspiracy theory that, since they're not grounded in science, it's hard for scientists to dispute them. If it's based on a feeling, on observation, I can't debunk it. But when we're talking in strictly scientific terms, one of the first things I want to do is to impress upon you that there's no such thing as a natural disaster. There's nothing natural about a disaster. There might be disasters that are triggered by a natural hazard. You with me? So that just by the way you frame it, there are no natural disasters. So to say that some of these hazards have been triggered, like the recent hurricane, let's say, to say that those hurricanes were caused by somebody seeding clouds, etc. I mean, that is a little too far fetched for me. I can't think of any scientific grounds to dispute it. It's just way out there in the ether. I think we have enough competent meteorologists, like my good friend Adrian Trotman, so who can actually tell you every stage in the development of these tropical depressions into what, etc. So that I'm really in no position to argue with some of the more way out conspiracy theories. If you're saying that it's man-made in the sense that it's caused by human behavior, then we're on the same page. Because now we are talking about anthropogenic climate change. We are saying that these increased hazards that we are facing have been caused by us humans, those of us who are belching all of these emissions into the atmosphere. We can demonstrate that is where those global warming and climate crisis generally comes from. So if you're referring to it as man-made in the sense that it was caused by man, then fine. But if you're talking about seeding clouds that, and fighter jets flying overhead and dropping stuff, I have to sign off at that point.
Well, that kind of is a perfect way to lead into some of the points that you raised, which I'm going to bring up some of these now. And I think you hinted to one just now, which is there's no such thing as a natural disaster. Explain that.
There's nothing natural about a disaster. The same category 4 hurricane that hits Cuba can hit, not wishing it, of course, can hit Dominica and cause a disaster. A disaster is a human construct. Yeah? It's called a disaster only if the community can't deal with it. In other words, if it overwhelms them. So that in some places that are maybe better prepared, the same hazard will not cause a disaster. And it is incorrect to imply that a disaster is a natural occurrence. It's only a disaster if the community can't deal with the hazard. So we do ourselves an injustice when we refer to it as a natural hazard, as a natural disaster, as if you couldn't do anything about it. It's nature taking its course. No, there are disasters that are caused by natural hazards, a naturally occurring hazard, an earthquake, let's say, right? So a category, again, not wishing it, a category 8 hurricane striking Japan is going to have a very different impact to a category 8 hurricane in the Caribbean. Why? Because in Japan, they're prepared for it. The community is prepared. They're built to a particular code, etc., etc., etc. So there will be nothing natural about that or disaster in Japan if you're talking about, a category 8 on the Richter scale earthquake. Am I clear?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So as I said, a disaster is a man-made construct. It is only a disaster if you can't handle it. That's the point I'm making. But when we say natural disaster, it gives the impression, which is what I'm worried about, that you couldn't do anything about it. It's just nature taking its course. No, that is what we want to avoid. So in 2025, we ought not to be. I need to talk to the people who know better. They will tell you don't refer to any disaster as a natural disaster. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Again, let me be quite clear. There are disasters that are caused by natural hazards, right? So, and this is not just semantics, This is actually a change in mindset, because there's a tendency to believe that, well, since it was a natural disaster, we expected that people would die and maybe homeless, etc. And that is not necessarily so, because to use the same beaten example, a category 4 hurricane striking a community that is better prepared is not necessarily going to be a disaster. Whereas you go through a community that is not prepared, doesn't have the resources to deal with it, then it is going to be a disaster. That's why sometimes you have to declare a disaster zone. Yeah? Even in the US, when they declare disaster zone, it's a disaster zone. That's that little area, that community can't deal with it right now. But they have resources from elsewhere that they will pour into it, and it is not going to be the 200% destruction of GDP that you find in Caribbean settings, let's say.
Yeah.
So I hope that does
No,
that help.
I totally understand that, and that's really good to know, because I think generally speaking, people have
At all
adopted the notion
all
of a
levels,
natural
at
disaster.
all levels, including people who not only know better, but it slips because it's natural. It's almost very natural to say it was a natural disaster, as if that is separated from a man-made disaster, where 12 guys with shotguns, kill an entire school. I mean, I'm not wishing that, but I'm just saying that that is a different kind of disaster, and if the community can't deal with it. So when they say natural disaster, they mean, okay, so no man was, physically seen shooting anybody, so then it's a natural disaster. And that is not correct.
Right, right. On that note, how can Caribbean countries, from an agriculture standpoint, somewhat guard themselves against natural disasters to minimize the impact of it?
Against natural hazards.
Natural hazards,
Natural
sorry.
hazards.
I have to get used to this.
So there we go. In between us, we're gonna make, but it's comfortable. Right? It's something that we're accustomed saying. So I have, I hold no brief.
Right, right.
So
yes.
what
So
we
how
have
can
been
how
able
can
to
farmers and people in the agriculture sector
make their
protect
farms
themselves?
more resilient, make their operations more climate smart, in a true sense? So that is what I've spent the last 10 years or so of my career doing, specifically looking at climate smart agriculture. To the extent where, as I said, I've developed this mechanism, this tool that quantifies what climate smart agriculture really means. Because in and of itself, it's a nebulous term. It means so much to so many different people that it absolutely means nothing. So let me just give you an example of what I mean. If someone does composting, right? Many of your viewers may know about composting, or let's say drip irrigation. That in and of itself does not make the operation climate smart. Climate smart agriculture involves all of these things. It involves composting, it involves using drip irrigation, etc. But you can't just do one practice and see that you have a climate smart operation. It's similar to someone saying that they're a safe driver just because they change their brakes regularly. But if you change your brakes and then you continue driving like an idiot, you're no more safer driver than anybody else. So this climate smart agriculture thing is an approach, and it involves a number of practices. And what we have done within PISLM and within the Caribbean is define what those are for particular circumstances and encourage farmers, incentivize farmers to change towards those climate smart agriculture compliant practices. Yeah. And even, I shouldn't say even, but in St. Kitts, and this is part of the process as well. I was a member of the team that recently did the vulnerability assessment for St. Kitts, for the agricultural sector, the health sector, and the tourism sector. So I can tell you that, I'm not just baying into the wind, these are very practical, very real things that are on the ground right now, and I'm lucky enough to be part of it.
Right. And finally, before I let you go, you also, in your message to me, spoke about and another term that we use a lot in the Caribbean, food security. You basically describing it as a misnomer and as a dangerous one as well. Explain that.
A dangerous one as well, yeah. And you know what gives me the authority to say that, Andre? I actually started my professional career in St. Kitts and Nevis back in 1982. And guess what I was working on? Food and nutrition surveillance, where along with people like Nurse Manning, who's still alive, along with people like Nurse Manning, we were looking at how do these governments come up with a food secure nation? In other words, how do we decide that the 2,000 calories that everyone is supposed to have access to is coming from useful sources and not just from empty calories? So as I said, to cut a long story short, if you mention food security, there's this obsession with a 2,000 or 2,500 calorie diet, which is in and of itself dangerous because those calories could be coming from soft drinks. And I don't think that's what you mean when you say you want to have a food secure nation. What you want to have is a nutrition secure nation, a nation that has access to the right mix of carbohydrates and proteins, etc., that will make for a healthy population. Because just saying that you imported, enough soft drinks for each person to have 2,500 calories is not what is meant. And that's what I meant by dangerously misrepresenting it.
Yeah, the importance of
Yeah.
terminology and the correct terminology.
The correct terminology. And again, it's not just semantics. I mean,
Yeah.
you see, because when you say food security, then you're going to look at the food import list. And there are a lot of things on that food importation list that should not be there at all. They're not really food. They're just empty calories. You can't just tell me because you have access to, again, without beating on the soft drink industry, you can't just tell me that because in other words, after disaster, what do? We just send, 10 containers of soft drinks because that would provide you 2,000 calories per day. But I'm sure that's not what people mean when they talk about food security. Yeah? So I hope that is as graphic an example as possible. Yeah.
Well, we're going to leave it there for today, though. It's a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure I've learned something, and I'm sure our viewers would have learned something as well in terms of terminologies. Well, thank you very much.
And again, I just want to repeat, it's not semantics. I'm not somebody, not some old school teacher with a dictionary coming to tell you that you should use it. It affects your mindset because when you say natural disaster, it gives the impression, and you give that impression as well, that this is just natural. There's nothing you could do about it. That's not the case. The hazard might be natural, but the disaster is dependent on the community.
All right. This is Steve Maximay, Climate Smart Agriculture and Marketing Expert at PISLM. That's Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management, right here in the Caribbean, headquartered in Grenada. Thank you so much for taking time out. It's been a while. We've been trying to get this interview done for some time now, so we're happy to finally have it done.
And unfortunately, unfortunately, I've been in St. Kitts, up and all during Caribbean Week of Agriculture,
Yes,
but
and we didn't get to meet.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks again, Steve.
Okay, Andre. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye. And that will do it for this week's edition of Newsline 360. It's a climate smart edition, a climate change edition. We discuss COP and we discuss matters of climate change right here on this week's edition of Newsline 360. I was your host, Andre Huey. Remember, you can watch the show again at the rebroadcast times on TVC Channel 40, or you can visit our website, tvcplus.live, or the TVC Plus app. I'm Andre Huey. Once again, thank you for watching Newsline 360 and stay tuned to Television Caribbean.